Welcome everyone to this presentation on religious parenting and how schools can support the important work of parents to transmit their faith. My name is Claire Kilbane, and I'm a faculty member at the McGrath Institute for Church Life, which is an institute at the University of Notre Dame. Our institute was established 40 years ago to serve leadership in the church and to channel the resources of the university and bring them to their service. Here I work in a variety of capacities. I support the preparation of theology teachers in our ECHO service program, and I serve as the learning designer in our STEP program, which provides affordable online theology courses for teachers, catechists, deacons, and other leaders in the church. I'm pleased to be with you here today, and I'm hoping that I'll be able to share some of the resources that I've procured for you. I got the idea for this presentation because of some past personal and professional experiences. I am not only an educator with a lot of experience, but I was formerly a Catholic school teacher, and I'm currently the parent of a Catholic school student. From these experiences, I recognized that there were very few things that prepared parents for their sacred task of raising their children in the faith. And I also recognized that teachers certainly could use more support for preparing students for sacraments, and also to kind of take and appropriate the lessons of faith that are so artfully shared in a Catholic school environment. I'm hoping that this presentation will prepare you to fulfill your leadership role and to support the parents in living their vocations. If I do my job well, this presentation will help you in three particular ways. First, it should allow you to appreciate the reasons why a Catholic school would want to support a parent in transmitting their faith to their child. Second, it will help you understand the research on religious parenting that has been generated in the last 20 years, and it will help you understand how this research could perhaps be brought to use in parenting situations and also in supporting parents. There's a lot of information that has been generated in the last 20 years, very useful information to support parenting. But it should be noted that this sociological research doesn't necessarily exist to tell us what we want to hear about parenting, nor does it exist to solve the parenting problems that exist. It also isn't comprehensive, and not every type of parenting situation is represented in this information that I'll present today, but it's actually a start. And what I have tried to do is to translate this information into more practical applications that could be used by parents. And third, this presentation should allow you to possess some information that could then be used to empower parents. You could certainly use it informally in conversations as the need arises, but I think you could also take what is being shared and create educational sessions if that is something that parents in your community would appreciate. Likewise, I am sharing with you a carefully prepared document that could be sent home with parents, either in more granular chunks or excerpts or as a whole, either in hard copy or electronic copy. And it shares the information from the sociological research and the practical takeaways and suggestions with parents. You could certainly benefit from sharing that with them. And then lastly, I hope that all these things will better equip you to do your very important task as a Catholic school leader, whether it be at the diocesan or at the school level. Okay, so moving on. I think that we'd all agree that it is certainly the work of a Catholic school to educate, evangelize, and catechize its students. But any school that fully wants to serve its students must also recognize their role in supporting parents. And so to fulfill their mission, a Catholic school must be willing to not only educate, catechize, and evangelize students, but also do those things for parents. During the last year and a half, I think we all recognize that parents have had an increased opportunity to serve as the primary educators of their children. With remote learning, quarantine, and other disruptions, there's a greater awareness for sure of the parental duties to support children's education, especially as it relates to religious belief and practice. But few parents feel truly prepared for this role. I do think that over the last 18 months to 2 years, many parents have come to love being more intimately involved with their children's education. And I also think there's been an increase in the appreciation for the value of religion in our personal lives. And I think many parents have relished the opportunity to support their children's development of faith and have probably learned a great deal themselves. All those things said, I think anyone working in Catholic education at the moment would also recognize that today's Catholic schools are increasingly diverse. This phenomenon occurred before the pandemic, but was certainly augmented and accelerated by it. And one way that this diversity manifests itself in any given school community is that families will differ in their degree of religious belief and also their variety and their parents' desire for children to appropriate this faith and make it their own. Although many parents choose Catholic schools for support in religious parenting, an increasing number of parents do not. In Catholic schools, there's such great communities and such excellent academic environments, you can't blame parents for choosing them. But the bottom line is that the Catholic school's mission is to support the transmission of religious belief and to support parents in their religious education of their children. So for a Catholic school to be successful in fulfilling this mission, it needs to support all of these parents. And that's a tough thing. I want to just name that and acknowledge that. So the question then is not whether a Catholic school should support parents in their efforts to transmit religious belief, but rather how. Surely there has to be a way of supporting all parents, including those who have other faith traditions, as well as those who are Catholic. And also doing that in a way that doesn't alienate parents who don't want this for their children. But I also see that there could be a way to do something even better, which would be to capitalize on this as an opportunity to evangelize all the members of the school community and move each person, regardless of where they are in the faith continuum, closer to beliefs in a religious way of life. The reality is that people can't be truly and fully happy without a relationship with God, because it's only in this relationship that a person can come to appreciate the most important mystery of their life, that they themselves and every human person are created from God's love and also held in existence by it. A recognition of this important mystery is key because it not only enables a person to understand the significance of their life, but also to find its meaning and purpose. So given this, it's a sacred task for a Catholic school leader to help everyone in their community, to the greatest extent possible, recognize this mystery and grow in their relationship with God. There are many different ways that a Catholic school leader might approach religious parenting and support the families that they serve. One way would be to call them out for not being more engaged in this important work. Perhaps you've known a leader who used this direct but very undiplomatic approach, and I wouldn't recommend it. A better way to address religious parenting would be for a school leader to assume parents' interest in religious transmission and then educate them so that they're better able to accomplish this important work and to support the work of the school. The way I see it, sharing research that motivates and equips parents to fulfill their role is a challenging task, but probably the most likely to be successful approach. The way I see it as a school's role is to help parents know that they are important and then equip them to be able to do their important work in transmitting their religious belief. Hopefully this presentation will equip you in both ways. Let me introduce you to Christian Smith and his work. Christian Smith is a well-known sociologist at the University of Notre Dame, whose professional career has focused on the study of spirituality and religion. Over the last 20 years, he's been involved in several very influential sociological studies. Perhaps you have heard of some of them. The first study I'd bring to your attention was on the religious experiences and spiritual experiences of American young people. In this work funded by the Lilly Endowment, it was part of a national study on youth and religion. Smith and a team of researchers sought to understand the religious experiences of emerging adults. The study spanned 16 years, and it followed 3,000 plus participants in 4 waves of survey and qualitative data. And it checked in with them over 2 different periods, between the ages of being 13 to 17, and then again from the ages of being 24 to 29. The question that Smith and his researchers asked was this one: which was, what factors have the greatest influence on the religious and spiritual lives of emerging American young adults? And they were looking at 3 indicators of engagement and adulthood that would suggest that the young people involved in the study were either involved or not involved with their religion, or committed to or not committed to their religion as young adults. And those included attendance at religious services, importance of the religious faith to them, and the frequency of prayer. So just to let you know, so with those 3,000 participants, they looked to see what was happening at different stages with survey and qualitative data. And then they drew some conclusions from that, which I would like to share with you. But before we do that, I'm going to ask you what you think are the greatest influences on the religious and spiritual lives of young people. So take just a moment and stop the video and then write those down. Okay, perhaps you put together a few ideas, and if you look at the screen, maybe you had some ideas that went along with that, such as peers or the school, ministers, mentors, media, or social media. Those are certainly all legitimate factors that may have influence on the religious and spiritual lives of young people. And Smith did find that there was influence from those particular factors for sure. However, the most important finding was one that might surprise you, although given the topic of this presentation, maybe not, but the most important factor in the lives of young people was the religious life of their parents, which is pretty cool to hear and surprising for a variety of reasons. Smith had to ask a question about that because he didn't expect to find parents' influence being so extreme. And so there were a few questions he had to work through. So the first was, why do people think parents aren't important? And he realized that there were probably a number of what he calls false cultural scripts that people believe, whether they be parents or the community members surrounding them. The first false script is that parental influence recedes to other forces, such as social media, peers, mentors, ministers. Quite frankly, that just did not stack up with the data that Christian Smith began to explore in this study. Secondly, there's a belief that once children get to a certain age, usually their teenagehood, when they are more autonomous in making decisions and they begin to rebel, the belief is that input from their parents causes an opposite reaction. So I think many parents have just, believed this and not tried to encourage their children to accept an appropriate religious belief at this point, thinking it would sabotage that or backfire. And the last false cultural script is that parents believe at a certain point they should turn over their children to experts or outsource the education of their children because they aren't experts. So there's this belief that you have to be an expert to have influence on children, to have good influence on children. And so this enables parents to decide not to take an active role in working to transmit religious belief and practice to their young people. Pretty interesting. We have to then question why we would believe these false cultural scripts if they're not true. Where's the explanation? And Christian Smith believes that it has something to do with the transition in how people understand themselves over the last 100 years. So we've transitioned from understanding ourselves primarily in who we are in relation to others as a member of a community, and we have begun to consider our identity very much grounded in ourselves as individuals. And that's affected religion. When we think about how people experience religion, and this thesis from Smith and his team of researchers suggests that over the last 100 years, religion as it's been experienced has transitioned from being a community solidarity project or something that was built and experienced together to being reduced to something that is really an extension or an accessory of our personal identity, just another among many choices that we would make to define who we are and how we navigate the world. There's a lot that could be said about this, and I'll put this slide up just to kind of indicate to you that if you're interested, there's more you can learn. I'm referencing a book called Handing Down the Faith that just came out in 2021, written by Smith and a co-author. And it goes into more explanation about religion's role and why we believe false cultural scripts. But I do think it's important to acknowledge that these are very real beliefs people have, and they do get in the way of people's perception of their importance in parenting. And maybe it makes it easier for parents to perhaps neglect some of their responsibilities in this area. So I think one thing we need to do is confront these false scripts and simply present the research that says parents, in fact, are the number one effect on their kids' religious belief. So let's move on and let's explain why. Well, in this first study on teens, Smith discovered that there were really two key roles that parents played. First was to define the role of religious faith and practice. So parents kind of articulated what it would be, what the purpose and meaning of religion ought to be. And then secondly, parents' own experience of religion, their religious lives, as Smith termed it, would set a ceiling for a child's religious commitment. So only very rarely was a child more involved in religion than their parent had been. And so it was really important, Smith thought, to explore more about the influences that parents had on kids. And so his next study focused on religious parenting. This was also supported by the Lilly Endowment. This study was a little different. It didn't involve 3,000 participants. Instead, it went into in-depth personal interviews with 250 parents. It explored parents who represented many different religious traditions, including Protestant, Catholic, Muslim, Mormon, Buddhist, and Hindu. They represented different parts of the country in the United States. And for all parents involved in the study, religion and religious parenting was an important part of their work. So there wasn't anyone involved who was marginally interested in parenting or not interested in parenting at all. Okay. And lastly, I would say that of the 250 participants, 75 of those were Catholics. And that was because the McGrath Institute had a particular interest in this, and it funded an oversampling of Catholic parents. Okay. The first finding I would share from Smith's more recent work on parenting is that it helps to think of a parenting household, or what we would refer to as a family, as a mini culture. In any culture, different types and points of human interaction affect a person in a particular way. Think for a moment about your own experiences through the typical interactions that you might have in a school, for example. You can probably think of different points of contact, such as rules or relationships with certain people. And as you think about your experiences in that culture, you probably agree that who you are today has a lot to do with the experience that you had in that culture. The thing to recognize is that a household culture isn't the same kind of culture as the culture of a school. It's a more fundamental and powerful culture. Experiences in the household form children with an unparalleled depth and power. They shape a child's motives, their aspirations and pleasures, and their modes of experience. Experiences in a household are formative, and they affect a person before, in, and beyond the time when they mature. Because of this, it's helpful to think of parenting or running a household culture as a meaning-making project, says Smith, where everything that is said and happens teaches a child how to be human, what matters, what to aspire to, what values should be espoused, and how to live a life that makes sense in a world where there are many different ways that someone could live a life. It should be noted that in a household, children learn both from the direct and indirect teaching of their parents. Pope Paul VI recognized, actually very prophetically, what modern people would be like. And even though he lived, over 50 years ago, he certainly had a good sense of what would be influential to the modern man. He said in this quote, "The modern man listens more willingly to witnesses than to teachers. And if he does listen to teachers, it is because they are witnesses." And I think if we wanted to capture the role of a parent, we certainly could capture it as a witness who is teaching. And the question for parents is, what are you teaching through your witness? This just makes it all the more important for parents to be thinking about their roles and how they can present their religious belief as a meaningful and beneficial, and therefore a worthy primary lifetime commitment. So this is the question: is how can parents show children that religion is meaningful? Of course, it's not surprising that this research is actually reflected in the wisdom of church teaching. And here we have a quote from the Catechism that explains that parents are first teachers and how. Parents have the responsibility for the preparation and education of their children. They bear witness to this responsibility first by creating a home where tenderness, forgiveness, respect, and fidelity and disinterested service are the rule. What a great quote to share with parents. Maybe it'll even interest them in digging deeper into the Catechism. I'd also share this quote about the importance of the home as a school. The home is the first school of Christian life and a school for human enrichment. Here one learns endurance and the joy of work, fraternal love, generous, even repeated forgiveness, and above all, divine worship and prayer and the offering of one's life. This is why the home is called often the domestic church, because this is where the life of Christ is taught and modeled to young people. Okay, so as Smith dug into his qualitative interviews, he discovered that there were really 3 different ways that parents were influencing young people. And I think as a school leader, it's really important, first off, to let parents know that they do, in fact, have an important influence on their children. And secondly, you need to make sure they understand how that influence is powerful. Okay, so first, parents are sponsors. What this means is that parents are the point of access between religion and their children. If children are going to be exposed to religious belief at all, it's probably going to be through their parents, because to differing degrees, other forces that influence children, neighborhoods, ethnicities, mainstream cultural attitudes, etc., have all declined in their ability to carry religious belief. There's a lot of reasons for that. One is that those carriers are now much less religious, but they have actually receded in their ability to transmit any kind of a coherent belief, because there's no coordination with the messages that are being shared through these different channels. And when we think about the confusion of young people today, and I think instead of believing a particular thing, they're confused in their belief. I think that is because of the confusion that is being transmitted through these various channels. Really, without a coherent worldview, one that religion offers, it's very hard for any kind of coherent understanding of reality and set of beliefs to be transmitted. Second, parents were considered to be gatekeepers. What this means, as the name would suggest, is that they have total control over how much and what sorts of religious content their children will encounter. There's a large understanding of content to Smith's team, but it includes things like whether children will attend a religious school. That would be considered religious content. Parents also determine whether children are going to read the Bible or receive sacraments regularly. That's also considered content. And lastly, parents would determine whether children are exposed to relationships and communities that have a religious dimension. That would also be considered content. Parents are definitely like a faucet that determine whether and how much religion will flow into their children's life. Okay, and lastly, parents are considered to be interpreters. This means that parents don't act as a neutral medium between religion and their children. They powerfully influence the experience of faith for their children. And they do this in a number of ways. First off, they're role models who teach their actions in specific manner what it looks like to be religious themselves and the meaning that that religion has for a person. Parents also teach children how to comprehend the world and how to understand what goes on, what's good and evil, how to intellectually and practically engage with the world, and so on. In this way, they don't just represent faith, but in many ways, they're a meaningful embodiment of faith to children. Parents often render religion a matter of flesh and blood as opposed to some mishmash of doctrines and teachings. So I guess to sum it up, parents, they do 3 things. They produce, induce, and interpret the family's experience of religious belief and practice. They're just one influence, but they are the influence that shape all other influences. Okay, I'm putting a bunch of text on the screen, not thinking that you're actually going to read it, but to show you that you can come back to the screen and dig in a little bit more deeply if you do get interested. Why would you be interested? Well, this screen is displaying what Christian Smith and his team identified as narratives that came through in these interviews that explain how people approach religion and why they would want to transmit this religion to their young people. There are 7 what he called common parenting narratives, and what you see from left to right is the name of the narrative, and then how it transmits religion, or why a parent has decided to transmit religion is because of this belief about religion. And then lastly, there's some representative comments that parents might make in response to the question, why transmit religion? I first off want to say that most parents have a variety of narratives, right? They embrace religion for a variety of reasons, but they tend to have one prevailing narrative. So for me, I think I fit into the dogmatic narrative, which suggests that I want my child to have religion because the religion recognizes a particular sense of reality and a particular way of living and acting within the reality, both the temporal reality and the eternal reality that my religion has allowed me to see with the eyes of faith. And I want my child to have this because it's right and it is the way the world works. And it's the only way that she's going to be able to have full development as a human person. So that is an example of the dogmatic narrative. Another narrative that you might be familiar with is a little different. And it is the moral narrative. And parents with this particular narrative want to transmit religion because they recognize its power to influence a person's morality and their development with a knowledge of right and wrong. And as we compare those 2 narratives, they're quite different in a fundamental way. And the relevant point here is that the narrative a parent has influences how likely it is that their child will appropriate religion and adhere to it in their own personal life when they have freedom of choice. The first narrative represents a type of narrative called an intrinsic narrative that suggests that religion is valuable in and of itself. The second example, the moral narrative, is representative of a type of narrative that values religion as an extrinsic good, one that is the means to an end. And what Smith found in his research was that the narratives that express the intrinsic value of the religion were more likely to be powerful and successful in transmitting that belief to children in a way that they would appropriate it in adulthood. So it's interesting to me to know those narratives exist because I obviously want, as an educator, to help people choose a narrative and grow into a narrative that's going to be more successful to them. But it does explain a lot of phenomena I remember seeing as a Catholic school teacher, and it explains kind of why people would choose religion even when they didn't share the same worldview necessarily that I did. So anyhow, kind of interesting. All right, so moving along. What is the goal for religious parenting? Well, Smith and his team discovered that there was a goal for religious parenting, right? And if they could be clear about it, parents would be more likely to be successful in it. And so what they found from their research is that successful parenting happened more frequently when a parent could create a household environment where children saw the practice of a religion, regardless of what that religion was, as both meaningful and beneficial. They saw the goods of it. They saw the meaning it added a life. And because of that, they were more likely to consider it to be a viable long-term commitment that was primary to someone's life. That is a big difference. When someone chooses religion, it becomes the priority and it really has to be elevated above all else. It's really the only way to fully live out religious belief successfully. And so this is the goal of a parent who wants to pass on the faith. They also found that when parents were authentic in their religious commitment, when they had a genuine embrace of that religion in both their words and their witness, they were more likely to be successful in transmitting faith. And I think this confirms what most of us who work with young people recognize, is that they're great at smelling out a phony. They can see whether you're genuinely embracing faith or not. And so when parents saw that their parents, when children saw that their parents embraced the faith and that they believed it was meaningful and necessary, parenting was more likely to be successful. Likewise, when children thought from the example of their parents that religion was pointless or maybe not worth the sacrifice or not necessary, they were more likely to fail in transmitting their religious faith. What else would I share with you from Smith's work? Well, I think it's important to recognize that this degree of interpretation that I've been talking about, okay, that was important in the work, but it was also important for parents to be conscious and intentional about transmitting their religious belief to their young people. And I think that the handout that I share with you gives them some suggestions about how they can be more intentional. And then lastly, parents need to work to make a commitment to supply religious content. And I guess that's good because Catholic schools are one of the most important kinds of religious content that can be provided, and they certainly need reinforcement for that. But here are some other things that Smith and his team said were important. Regular practices, and there's a couple of those like weekly mass and grace before meals, but other regular practices might include things like celebrating holy days with special things like Mary's birthday with birthday cake, etc. Relationships were also an important form of religious content. Experiential opportunities like mission trips and college at a Catholic university, especially if it's one that really is truly and passionately Catholic. And lastly, religious volunteering together as a family was really important, according to Smith's experiences. So some practical suggestions for you as you work to support parents. What I would first say is that parents need to be aware that they do in fact have an influence, and they are the most important influence. And this means that you might need to raise to their attention that there are false cultural scripts that we believe. And we need to recognize, do not stand up with the research that was so meticulously conducted by Christian Smith. Okay, secondly, parents benefit from knowing that they have multiple roles. And if you recall, those were that they are the sponsors, the gatekeepers, and also the interpreters of religious belief and practice for their young people. Third, Catholic school leaders can help parents recognize that those parents who embrace their religion authentically will be the most successful, and any opportunities that the school and other religious leaders in the area, that might be the parish or maybe there's apostolates, any of those supports that can be provided to parents are going to make them more successful. And then lastly, I think parents need to be encouraged to be intentional and develop a strategy. Oh, and there was one more. It's just important to continue to provide parents experiences for faith sharing and also for learning that they can continue to grow in their faith. And I would simply say that I recognize the many competing interests of schools and the challenges that school leaders face. And so sometimes I think we solve problems by just empowering parents to help each other. And one of the administrators I know and who reviewed this presentation for me said that she had a group in her school that met monthly called Parenting and Families First. And this is going to be a presentation that they review in that group. I think the parent's going to review it and then present these ideas that she finds relevant to the other parents. So just a suggestion there. And then I would say, I think that this presentation about the importance of adults, specifically parents, shed some things that probably generalize to the influence of all adults that work with children in faith formation. And that these things are also true for schools, that schools have an opportunity to be gatekeepers for religious content, and also that the adults in schools can help kids interpret the experiences that they have. Likewise, I think that there needs to be authentic living of a life of faith among the school faculty members and those in the community who support the school. I do think that every teacher who doesn't really embrace the faith fully and authentically is probably not a neutral factor in a child's life, but actually an undermining influence to the work of a Catholic school. And so I, as an administrator, as it's possible in your own school community, I encourage you to really support and enrich the religious development of the teachers in your school. And I'll just give a short plug for the very affordable courses that we have in the McGrath Institute that could support that. Those are part of our STEP program. Okay. Lastly, I just wanted to share some resources with you that you can access at any time. The report on American religious Catholic Parenting and Religious Parenting commissioned by the McGrath Institute is available for download for free. And in a minute, you'll see some slides for the references to Christian Smith's work, which of course you could also Google. There's a great organization called Strong Catholic Families. They have a wonderful Facebook page I would recommend. It reports on some of Christian Smith's research and also provides some great resources from the National Council of Youth Ministry, and that's where this next resource, which is a family mission statement activity, comes from. And then lastly, I would refer you to the Church Life Journal, which is a publication of the McGrath Institute, and this excellent article written by Lenny DiLorenzo on how parents can get more involved in sharing their faith and parenting for religious belief, and to resist the challenge of outsourcing catechesis to other people. Okay, lastly, I just wanted to put up on the screen for your reference these resources from Christian Smith. And I just want to thank you for attending this presentation. I hope it was beneficial to you. I'd be really happy to speak with anyone who's interested, and my contact information is prepared and on the initial slide for this presentation. Thank you so much for your time and attention, and I just wish you all the best with your important leadership in Catholic schools.